My name is Anna Light, and I am 28 years old. 3 weeks ago, I stood in an empty funeral home and realized that everything my parents ever told me was a lie. The old man in the casket, the one they called dangerous, the one they sued 3 times, the one they built a 10-foot fence to keep away from me, wasn't a threat. He was my grandfather. And the envelope the lawyer handed me that day contained a 45-year-old secret about a hit and run, a stolen identity, and a love so quiet I never knew it existed. For my entire childhood, my parents warned me to stay away from Walter Hartley. They said he was obsessed, unstable, a danger to our family. But when he died alone, I was the only person who came to say goodbye. And that's when I learned the truth about the fence, the lawsuits, and the man who spent 4 decades protecting me from a distance. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with this story. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world right now, drop a comment with your location and the time. I'd love to know I'm not alone in this. This is the story of the grandfather I never knew I had, and the father I wish I'd never known at all. The fence went up the summer I turned 5. I remember standing in the backyard, holding my mother's hand, watching 2 men in work boots sink posts into the ground. My father stood beside them with his arms crossed, pointing occasionally, his voice low and firm. "No gaps," he kept saying. "I'm paying you extra. Make sure there are no gaps." The fence was 10 feet tall, made of solid oak planks stained dark walnut. It ran the entire length of our property line, separating our house from the one next door. I asked my mother why we needed it, and she knelt down, tucked my hair behind my ear, and said, "To keep us safe, sweetheart." Safe from what? She didn't answer. She just stood up and walked back inside. For 2 years, that fence did exactly what my father wanted. It blocked the view. It blocked the sound. It blocked any possibility of contact with the man who lived on the other side. But wood shrinks. By the time I was 8 years old, a small gap had opened near the back corner of our yard. Just a sliver, no wider than my thumb, but enough to see through if I pressed my face close. I don't know what made me look the first time. Curiosity, maybe. Or loneliness. But I crouched down, put my eye to the gap, and saw him. An old man sitting in a wooden rocking chair on his back porch. He wasn't doing anything threatening. He was just sitting there, his hands folded in his lap, looking toward our house. And when he saw me, I'm sure he did because he went very still. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just smiled. A small, sad smile that I didn't understand. I pulled back and ran inside, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't name. My parents never used his name. It was always that man, or the neighbor, or, more often, nothing at all. Just silence and closed curtains. "Stay away from the back fence," my father would say at breakfast, his voice calm but final, the way he said everything. "Don't go near it. Don't look over it. Do you understand?" I nodded. I always nodded. My mother was subtler. She'd pull the blinds shut whenever she walked past the windows that faced his house. She'd usher me inside if I spent too long in the yard. Once, when I was 10, I asked her why we couldn't just talk to him, why we had to pretend he didn't exist. She set down the dish she was drying and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between fear and fury. "Because some people don't deserve explanations, Anna. Some people are just wrong. And your father and I have protected you from that man since the day you were born. The least you can do is trust us." I never asked again. But I noticed things. The way my father's jaw tightened whenever a car door slammed next door. The way my mother would watch from the kitchen window, her arms crossed, her mouth pressed into a thin line. The way they never invited the neighbors on the other side to their dinner parties, even though the Prices had lived across the street for as long as I could remember. I learned early that questions about Walter Hartley were not welcome in our house. Silence was the price of peace. And I paid it, year after year, because I didn't know any other way to be a good daughter. But the gap in the fence stayed, and so did he. The lawsuit started when I was 12. I didn't understand what was happening at first. Just that my father spent a lot of time on the phone with someone named Harrison Cole, and that every time he hung up, he'd slam his hand on the kitchen counter and mutter something about, "that stubborn old bastard." The first lawsuit was about leaves. Walter's oak tree dropped leaves into our yard every fall, and my father claimed it was a nuisance, a health hazard, a deliberate act of harassment. He took it to small claims court. The judge dismissed it in under 10 minutes. The second lawsuit came a year later. My father accused Walter of surveillance, of standing at his windows and staring into ours. He had no photographs, no evidence, just his own insistence that it was happening. That case was dismissed too. The third lawsuit was the worst. I was 16, old enough to understand what restraining orders were, old enough to sit in the courthouse hallway, while my father tried to convince a judge that Walter Hartley was a threat to our family. He asked the court to force Walter to move, to leave the house he'd lived in for over a decade. Walter didn't show up to any of the hearings. He sent his lawyer instead, a quiet, gray-haired man in a wool suit who spoke in calm, measured tones and presented utility bills, tax records, and affidavits from other neighbors who said Walter kept to himself and caused no trouble. The judge denied my father's petition, and when we left the courthouse that day, my father didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the week. I remember thinking, even then, that there was something strange about it all. Why did my father care so much? Why did he want this man gone so badly? I didn't have an answer, but I remembered the name of Walter's lawyer, Harrison Cole. The gifts started appearing when I was 8. The first one was a small wooden doll, hand-carved, with a painted blue dress and yellow hair. I found it on the back steps one morning, nestled in a patch of clover. No note, no name, just the doll, smooth and warm in my hands. I brought it inside and asked my mother where it came from. She glanced at it, frowned, and said, "Maybe one of the neighbors. Mrs. Price, probably." But I knew it wasn't from Mrs. Price. She didn't carve wood. And besides, the doll had been placed on our steps, not left on the front porch where guests would leave things. More gifts followed over the years. An illustrated copy of The Secret Garden when I was 10. A set of Prismacolor pencils, 72 colors, when I was 12. A silver bookmark engraved with a quote from Little Women when I was 14. They appeared on days when I needed them most. After I failed a math test. After I fought with my mother. After my best friend moved away and I spent a week crying in my room. I never told my parents about the later ones. I hid them in a shoebox under my bed, stacked between old journals and forgotten school projects. Because even though I didn't know who was leaving them, I knew my father would take them away if he found out. He'd call it inappropriate, suspicious, proof that someone was watching me. And maybe someone was. But the last gift was different. It arrived on my 18th birthday. A small wooden picture frame with intricate carvings along the edges. The frame was empty, but along the bottom, burned into the wood in careful script, were 4 words. For Anna, with love. That's when I knew. The gifts weren't from Mrs. Price. They were from him. I left for college the week after my 18th birthday. Penn State felt like freedom. I studied early childhood education, made friends who didn't know my parents, and built a life where I didn't have to tiptoe around silence. I came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, but each visit felt shorter, colder. My mother would comment on my weight, my clothes, my choices. My father would sit in his leather armchair and ask pointed questions about my grades, my finances, my future. I graduated, took a teaching job at a preschool in Pittsburgh, and moved into a small apartment with IKEA furniture and walls I could paint whatever color I wanted. I visited my parents maybe twice a year, just enough to avoid confrontation. But one weekend, when I was 27, I drove back to drop off some old boxes my mother had been asking for. I parked in the driveway, carried the boxes inside, and walked out to the backyard to see if the old swing set was still there. It wasn't. But the fence was, and so was the gap. I don't know why I looked through it again. Maybe because I was an adult now, and the old rules didn't seem to matter anymore. Or maybe because I'd never stopped wondering. I knelt down, pressed my face to the wood, and looked through. Walter was still there. Older now, thinner, his hair completely white. He sat in the same rocking chair, a blanket over his lap, staring toward our house with the same sad, patient expression I remembered from childhood. I wanted to say something, to call out, to ask him why, but before I could, my mother's voice cut through the air. "Anna! Get inside! Now!" I pulled back, my heart racing. That was the last time I saw him alive. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in my classroom, setting up finger paints for my students, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Hello? Is this Anna Light?" "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name is Harrison Cole. I'm an attorney here in Pittsburgh. I'm calling regarding the estate of Walter Hartley." I froze, a paint jar halfway to the table. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "I think you have the wrong number. I didn't know Walter Hartley." There was a pause. Then, in a quieter voice, Harrison said, "He knew you." I sat down on one of the tiny classroom chairs, my knees weak. "Mr. Hartley passed away 3 days ago," Harrison continued. "He left instructions in his will that you be contacted. You're listed as a beneficiary, and he requested that you attend his funeral. It's this Friday at 2 o'clock. I can send you the details if you'd like." "I don't understand," I said. "How did he even know my phone number?" "I don't have an answer to that, Ms. Light. But I do have a letter he wrote. He asked that I give it to you in person. If you'd be willing to meet, I think it would be worth your time." I stared at the finger paints, at the tiny chairs, at the bulletin board covered in construction paper apples. "Okay," I said finally, "I'll be there." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone. On Friday afternoon, I got in my car and drove to the funeral home Harrison had named, a small, plain building on the edge of town, the kind of place that held services for people no one remembered. And I walked inside to say goodbye to a man I'd never really met. The chapel was empty, no flowers, no photographs, no mourners in the pews, just a plain oak casket at the front of the room, closed, with a single white lily resting on top. I stood in the doorway, my purse clutched against my chest, and felt something crack open inside me. A man in a dark gray suit approached from the side aisle. He was in his mid-50s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Ms. Light?" I nodded. "I'm Harrison Cole." He extended his hand and I shook it. His grip was warm, steady. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be confusing." "Where is everyone?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Harrison's expression softened with something like grief. "There is no one else. Walter didn't have any other family, no close friends. He kept to himself." I looked past him at the casket. "Then why am I here?" "Because you mattered to him," Harrison said simply. "More than you know." The service was short. A minister I didn't recognize read a generic prayer. There was no eulogy, no music, just 10 minutes of silence and scripture, and then it was over. As the funeral director began to wheel the casket toward the back, Harrison touched my elbow gently. "There's something I need to give you," he said. "Walter left explicit instructions. He wanted you to have this before anything else." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope, the kind with a metal clasp. My name was written on the front in shaky handwriting. "Anna Light." "He asked that you read it alone," Harrison said quietly. "But when you're ready, I'll explain everything." I took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, I could feel papers, a letter, something else, and my entire life was about to change. I didn't open the envelope right away. I sat in my car in the funeral home parking lot, the envelope on my lap, staring at my name written in that unsteady script. My hands were shaking too much. My mind was too loud. Finally, I undid the clasp. Inside were three things. The first was a photocopy of a will, typed, notarized, official. I skimmed it, not understanding most of the legal language, but my name appeared again and again. To Anna Light, bequeath, estate, beneficiary. The second was a photograph. It showed a young man, maybe 22 or 23, standing beside an old Honda Civic. He wore a white button-down shirt and jeans, his hair dark and neatly combed. He was smiling, confident, easy, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who thought the world was his. I stared at the face in the photo. It looked like my father. Not exactly. The features were softer, younger, less severe. But the resemblance was undeniable. The same sharp jawline, the same deep-set eyes, the same slight cleft in the chin. My stomach turned. The third item was a letter, handwritten on lined paper, folded carefully. I unfolded it with shaking hands and began to read. Dear Anna, my name is Walter Hartley, and I am your grandfather. I stopped breathing. Your father's real name is Richard Hartley. 45 years ago, he made a terrible mistake, and I have spent every day since trying to protect you from the truth he couldn't face. There is a case file. Harrison has it. I hope when you read it, you'll understand why I did what I did, why I stayed, why I watched, why I couldn't leave, even when your father wanted me gone. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I could only love you from a distance. Please forgive me. The letter was signed in the same shaky hand. Walter. I read it 3 times, and then I started to cry. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes, reading and rereading the letter, trying to make sense of words that didn't fit into the reality I'd known my entire life. Your father's real name is Richard Hartley. But my father's name was Richard Light. It had always been Richard Light. I'd seen his driver's license, his business cards, his tax documents. I'd never questioned it. 45 years ago, he made a terrible mistake. What mistake? I have spent every day since trying to protect you from the truth he couldn't face. Protect me from what? The letter didn't say. It only hinted. It only opened a door and left me standing on the threshold, too terrified to step through. I pulled out my phone and called Harrison. He answered on the second ring. Ms. Light? What mistake? I said, my voice cracking. What did my father do? There was a long pause. Then Harrison said, I think you should come to my office. There are things I need to show you. Documents, records. It's not something I can explain over the phone. Tell me now. Ms. Light, please. I was crying again, my voice breaking. Just tell me. Harrison exhaled slowly. Your father was involved in a hit-and-run in 1980. A young woman died. Her name was Dorothy Smith. She was 19 years old. Your father was driving the car, and then he disappeared. The world tilted. Walter spent years looking for him, Harrison continued, his voice gentle but firm. When he finally found him, when he learned that Richard had changed his name, started a new life, had a daughter, he made a choice. He moved next door, not to punish him, not to expose him, but to be close to you, to make sure you were safe, to love you the only way he could. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was sit there and let the truth bury me. I drove to my parents' house that night. I didn't call ahead. I didn't plan what I was going to say. I just drove. The letter clutched in my hand, my vision blurred with tears and rage. When I pulled into the driveway, the lights were on. My father's car was parked in the garage. Everything looked normal, pristine, perfect. I walked up to the front door and pounded on it. My mother answered, surprised. Anna, what are you? Where's Dad? She blinked. He's in the study. What's wrong? I pushed past her and walked down the hall. My father was sitting at his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, a glass of scotch beside his computer. He looked up when I entered. Anna, this is unexpected. Why did you tell me your parents were dead? I said, my voice shaking. He went very still. What are you talking about? Walter Hartley. I held up the letter. He died last week. I went to his funeral. And his lawyer gave me this. My father's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something cold and sharp. That man filled your head with lies. Then tell me the truth. There's nothing to tell. He says he's my grandfather. He says your real name is Richard Hartley. He says, enough. My father stood, his voice like a blade. That man was obsessed with this family. We protected you from him for 28 years. And now you're going to believe him over your own parents? My mother appeared in the doorway, pale. Richard. Stay out of this, Patricia. I stepped forward and placed the letter on his desk. Read it. He didn't. He picked it up, glanced at the first line, and threw it into the fireplace. The paper caught instantly. Flames licked the edges, curling Walter's words into ash. This conversation is over, my father said. I stared at him, and then I left. Harrison's office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind with creaky wooden floors and frosted glass doors. His name was painted in gold letters. Harrison Cole, attorney at law. I climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor and knocked. Come in. The office was small but tidy, shelves lined with legal books, a desk covered in files, a coffee maker in the corner. Harrison stood when I entered and gestured to the chair across from his desk. Thank you for coming, he said. I sat down, my purse in my lap, my hands clenched. My father burned the letter. Harrison nodded slowly. I thought he might. That's why I made copies. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thin manila folder. He placed it on the desk between us. This is the case file, he said. Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus unknown driver, June 12, 1980. I opened it with trembling hands. The first page was a police report. I scanned the details: time, location, victim's name. Dorothy Smith, age 19, Carnegie Mellon University student, pronounced dead at the scene. Cause of death: blunt force trauma, hit and run. Vehicle: possibly a Honda Civic, late 1970s model, dark color. Driver fled the scene. I turned the page. There were photographs, grainy, black and white, a stretch of road, tire marks, a body covered with a sheet. My hands shook. The car was registered to Richard Hartley, Harrison said quietly. Walter's son, your father, but by the time police tracked down the registration, Richard was gone. New name, new social security number, he disappeared. How did Walter find him? It took years. He hired private investigators. He followed paper trails, tax records, marriage licenses, birth certificates. When he finally found Richard, you were 3 years old, and Richard was living under the name Richard Light. I closed my eyes. Walter moved into the house next door 6 months later, Harrison continued. Not to punish, not to threaten, but to watch over you, to be close to the granddaughter he couldn't claim. I opened my eyes and looked at Harrison. Why didn't he go to the police? Because he loved you, Harrison said simply, and he knew what would happen if your father went to prison. I need to pause here for a moment, because this is where everything in my life split into before and after. If you've ever discovered a family secret that made you question everything, your childhood, your parents, your own identity, please leave a comment. I read every single one. And if this story is hitting close to home, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Let me tell you what I found next. Harrison drove me to Evelyn Price's house that afternoon. She lived across the street from my parents, in a small yellow bungalow with a garden full of roses. I'd seen her 1,000 times growing up, waving from her porch, watering her flowers, walking her old beagle, but I'd never really talked to her. She answered the door before we knocked, as if she'd been waiting. Anna, she said softly, I wondered when you'd come. She led us into a living room that smelled like Earl Grey and lavender. We sat on a floral couch while she poured tea from a porcelain pot, her hands steady despite her age. You knew, I said. I knew, Evelyn confirmed. She set down the teapot and looked at me with eyes that had seen too much and stayed silent too long. I've known for 45 years. Why didn't you say anything? She folded her hands in her lap. Because Walter asked me not to. She told me what she'd seen that night. June 12th, 1980. She'd been up late, couldn't sleep, sitting by her bedroom window with a cup of tea. At 2 in the morning, she'd seen a car pull into the Hartley driveway, a dark Honda Civic with a dented front bumper and a cracked headlight. Richard had stumbled out, young and terrified. Walter had come outside in his robe. They'd argued on the lawn. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see Richard gesturing wildly, Walter gripping his son's shoulders. By morning, the car was gone. I wanted to call the police, Evelyn said, her voice thick. But Walter came to my door that afternoon and begged me not to. He said he'd handle it. He said his son would turn himself in. I believed him. She looked down at her tea. I didn't know Richard had run until years later, when Walter moved next door to your family. That's when I understood. Walter wasn't protecting his son anymore. He was protecting you. Back at Harrison's office, he read the will aloud. It was short, formal, but every word felt like a hand reaching across the years. I, Walter James Hartley, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the following. To my granddaughter, Anna Marie Light, born Anna Marie Hartley, I leave my home and all its contents. I leave her my savings, $15,000, with the request that she use it to honor the memory of Dorothy Smith, whose life was stolen and whose family never received justice. I leave her my photographs, my letters, and my love, things I could only give from a distance. And I leave her the truth, which I should have given her long ago. Harrison's voice was steady, but I could see the grief in his face. There's more, he said quietly, and handed me a second letter, handwritten, just like the first. I unfolded it. Anna. I failed my son. I raised him, loved him, and tried to teach him right from wrong, but when it mattered most, he ran, and I didn't stop him. I failed Dorothy Smith. I failed her family. I failed everyone who deserved the truth. But I will not fail you. You are the best thing Richard ever did, even if he doesn't deserve the credit. You are kind. You are brave. You are everything I wished my son could have been. Tell the truth, Anna, not for revenge, not to punish, but because Dorothy Smith deserves to be remembered. Because silence is a kind of violence. And because you deserve to live in the light, not in the shadow of someone else's lies. I'm sorry I couldn't be the grandfather you needed, but I hope, in some small way, I was the grandfather you deserved. With all my love, Walter. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest, and I made a decision. My father called the next morning. I was in my apartment, sitting at my kitchen table with the will and the letters spread out in front of me. When I saw his name on my phone screen, I almost didn't answer, but I did. Anna. His voice was calm, too calm. We need to talk. I don't think we do. Listen to me carefully, he said, and the temperature in his voice dropped. I know what you're thinking. I know what that man told you. But if you pursue this, you will destroy our family. Your mother will never forgive you. The community will turn on you. You'll lose everything. I've already lost everything, I said quietly. No, you haven't, but you will. He paused. Think about what you're doing, Anna. You're choosing a dead man, a man you didn't even know, over your living parents, over your family, over everything we've built. You built it on a lie. I built it to survive! His voice cracked, just for a second, and I heard something underneath the anger, something raw and desperate. I was 23 years old. I made a mistake. I panicked, and I've spent 45 years trying to live with it. You have no idea what that's like. You're right, I said. I don't. Because I would have told the truth. He was silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice like ice, he said, "If you go public with this, I will make sure you regret it. I'll hire lawyers. I'll contest the will. I'll make your life hell. Do you understand me?" I closed my eyes. "Goodbye, Dad." I hung up. 2 minutes later, my mother sent a text. "You're destroying your father for a man who was nothing but a coward. I hope you can live with that." I turned off my phone, and I called Harrison. For 3 days, I didn't leave my apartment. I sat on my couch, staring at the will, the letters, the photographs. I read Dorothy Smith's name over and over until it felt less like a stranger's and more like someone I owed. A girl, just 19, who'd never gotten the chance to be anything else, but doubt crept in. My father's words echoed in my head. "You're destroying your family. The community will turn on you. You'll lose everything." What if he was right? What if I was just being vindictive? What if I was using Walter's death as an excuse to punish my parents for a childhood I couldn't let go of? I called my best friend Maya. She listened while I cried and told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. "I think," she said slowly, "that you already know. And I think you're scared because doing the right thing is going to cost you. But Anna, sometimes the cost of staying silent is higher." I hung up and sat in the silence of my apartment. I thought about my father, about the man he'd been when I was little, before I understood what silence meant. I thought about my mother, who'd chosen him over the truth every single day. And I thought about Walter, sitting in that rocking chair for 40 years, watching me grow up through a gap in a fence, loving me the only way he could. I picked up the photograph, the one of my father as a young man, smiling like the world owed him something. And I thought about Dorothy Smith, 19 years old, who never got to smile like that again. I stood up. I called Harrison. "I want to go public," I said. "All of it." Before I met with Harrison, I drove back to my parents' house one last time. Not to see them, just to see the fence. I parked on the street and walked around to the back of the property. The fence was still there, older now, grayer, some of the boards warped and splitting. But it still stood, 10 feet tall, blocking everything. I knelt down at the corner where the gap used to be. It was still there. Wider now, the wood rotted enough that I could see through without pressing my face close. I looked through. Walter's house was empty, the rocking chair was gone, the porch was bare, but I could still picture him there, patient, quiet, waiting, and I remembered. I remembered being 8 years old and finding the wooden doll, 10 years old and finding the book, 12 and finding the pencils. I remembered every gift, every quiet gesture, every moment when I'd felt seen by someone I wasn't supposed to notice. He'd been there my entire life, watching, protecting, loving me the only way he could. I stood up and walked to the front of Walter's house. Harrison had given me the key. Inside, the house was small and plain, a single bedroom, a kitchen with outdated appliances, a living room with a worn couch and a bookshelf full of woodworking manuals. And on the mantel, a box. I opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, pictures of me, taken from a distance, playing in the yard, reading on the porch, walking to the school bus. Every picture was labeled in Walter's shaky handwriting. Anna, age 8, first day of 3rd grade. Anna, age 12, reading in the garden. Anna, age 16, graduation day. He hadn't been spying, he'd been remembering. I sat on the floor and cried until I couldn't anymore. And then I called Harrison. "Let's do this." Harrison and I met at his office the next morning. He poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and set one in front of me. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure," he nodded. "Then here's what I recommend. We hold a press conference, small, local. We invite the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, maybe 1 or 2 other outlets. We present the will, the case file, and Evelyn's testimony. We let the facts speak for themselves. Will they reopen the investigation? I don't know, Harrison said honestly. It's been 45 years. Evidence is scarce, but the statute of limitations for vehicular homicide in Pennsylvania is still in effect. If the police believe there's enough to pursue, they will. I wrapped my hands around the mug. What if my father tries to stop it? He can try. He can threaten legal action, but we're not accusing him of anything directly. We're simply presenting public records and asking for accountability. That's protected speech. I nodded slowly. There's something else, Harrison said. He pulled a folder from his desk. I've been trying to locate Dorothy Smith's family. She was an orphan, no parents, no siblings, but I found an uncle, her father's brother. He's 78 now, lives in Ohio. I reached out. He said he'd be willing to speak with you if you want. My throat tightened. I want to. Harrison slid a piece of paper across the desk, a name, an address, a phone number. We'll hold the press conference this Saturday, he said. 2:00, at the Carnegie Library. It's public space, neutral ground. I'll contact the reporter I know, Sarah Watkins. She's fair. She'll cover it accurately. I took a breath. Okay. Your parents will know by Friday, Harrison warned. Word will get out. Are you ready for that? I thought about the photographs in Walter's house. Yes, I said. I'm ready. The news leaked on Thursday. I don't know how my father found out. Maybe he had a friend at the courthouse. Maybe he'd been watching Harrison's movements. Maybe it was just instinct. But he knew. My phone rang at 7 in the morning. You're really going to do this? His voice was flat, drained of anger, just exhausted. Yes. You'll regret it, Anna. Maybe, but at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. He didn't respond right away. Then quietly he said, You don't understand what you're taking from me. I understand exactly what I'm taking. The same thing you took from Dorothy Smith. He hung up. An hour later, my mother called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Anna, please, please don't do this. Your father made a mistake a long time ago, but he's a good man. He's been a good father to you. Doesn't that count for anything? Doesn't loyalty mean anything to you? That man, Walter, he wasn't family. He was a stranger who couldn't let go. And now you're letting him destroy us from beyond the grave. I'm begging you, don't do this. Her voice broke at the end. I deleted the message. That afternoon, Harrison called. Your father's lawyer reached out. They're threatening to file an injunction to stop the press conference. It won't hold. There's no legal basis, but they're trying. Let them try. Anna. Harrison's voice was gentle. Are you okay? I looked around my apartment, at the IKEA furniture, the secondhand dishes, the life I'd built away from my parents. I will be, I said. On Friday night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table and wrote out what I was going to say. Not a speech, just the truth. Simple, clear, undeniable. This is the moment I realized there was no turning back. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth, even when it cost you everything, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below, and if you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. You're about to see what happened when I stopped being the quiet daughter and started being the woman my grandfather believed I could be. Here's what happened next. I spent Friday night at Walter's house. It felt right, somehow. Sleeping in the house that should have been part of my life all along. I lay in his bed, a simple wooden frame, a thin mattress, sheets that smelled faintly of cedar, and stared at the ceiling. I thought about him lying here, night after night, year after year, knowing his son was just on the other side of the fence, knowing his granddaughter was growing up without him. I wondered if he'd been lonely. I knew he had. In the morning, I showered and dressed in the simplest clothes I owned. A white blouse, navy slacks, flat shoes. I didn't want to look polished or put together. I just wanted to look honest. I ate toast at Walter's kitchen table and drank coffee from a chipped mug. I read through the will one more time. I looked at Dorothy Smith's name in the police report and memorized the details. 19 years old, Carnegie Mellon, orphan, buried in a county cemetery with a small granite headstone and no one left to visit. I folded the papers carefully and put them in a leather folder Harrison had given me. At 1:30, I locked the door to Walter's house, my house now, and drove to the Carnegie Library. The building was old and beautiful, with red brick walls and tall white columns. I'd been there 100 times as a child, checking out books, attending story hours. Now I was walking in to tell a story no one wanted to hear. Harrison was waiting in the lobby. So was Evelyn Price, dressed in a lavender cardigan, her hands folded over her purse. "Ready?" Harrison asked. I nodded. We walked down the hall to the community room, and I stepped into the rest of my life. The community room was small, maybe 30 chairs arranged in rows, a table at the front with a microphone, a podium to the side. About 20 people were already seated. Some I recognized. Neighbors from my parents' street, people I'd seen at the grocery store, the post office. Others I didn't know. A woman in the front row had a camera. A man beside her held a voice recorder. Sarah Watkins from the Post-Gazette. She caught my eye and nodded. I walked to the front of the room, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Harrison and Evelyn sat in chairs behind the table. I stood at the podium and adjusted the microphone. The room went quiet. I looked out at the faces, some curious, some suspicious, some simply waiting. And I saw, in the back row, 2 figures slip in through the door. My father, my mother. They didn't sit. They stood against the wall, arms crossed, watching. I met my father's eyes. He didn't look away. Neither did I. I cleared my throat and began. "My name is Anna Light," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I'm 28 years old. I'm a preschool teacher. And 3 weeks ago, I went to the funeral of a man I was told to fear my entire life." I paused. "His name was Walter Hartley, and he was my grandfather." A ripple of whispers moved through the room. I continued. "I'm here today because my grandfather left me a will, and in that will, he told me a truth that had been buried for 45 years. A truth about a hit and run, a young woman's death, and a family that chose silence over justice." I opened the folder on the podium. "I'm here to break that silence." "I didn't know Walter Hartley," I said, looking out at the room. "My parents made sure of that. They built a 10-foot fence to keep him away. They sued him 3 times. They told me he was dangerous, unstable, a threat to our family. And I believed them, because that's what children do." I took a breath. But when Walter died and I became the only person at his funeral, his lawyer gave me an envelope. Inside was a will, a letter, and the truth about who Walter really was. I held up the photograph of my father as a young man. "This is my father, Richard Light." But that wasn't always his name. 45 years ago, he was Richard Hartley, Walter's son. And on June 12, 1980, he was involved in a car accident that killed a 19-year-old woman named Dorothy Smith. The whispers grew louder. I saw Sarah Watkins lean forward, her pen moving quickly across her notepad. "My father fled the scene," I continued. "He changed his name. He built a new life, and Walter, the man who should have turned him in, the man who should have demanded justice, made a different choice. He chose to stay silent, not to protect my father, but to protect me." I looked at my parents in the back of the room. My mother's hand was over her mouth. My father stood frozen, his face pale. "Walter moved into the house next door when I was 3 years old," I said. "He spent the next 25 years watching me grow up through a gap in a fence. He left me gifts. He kept photographs. He loved me the only way he could, from a distance, because he knew that if he came forward, if he told the truth, I would lose my father, and he couldn't do that to me." I paused. "But I can." I stepped aside and gestured to Harrison. He stood, adjusted his glasses, and picked up the will. His voice was calm, clear, steady. "This is the last will and testament of Walter James Hartley, executed on September 14th of this year, 6 weeks before his death. It reads as follows, he began. I, Walter James Hartley, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my granddaughter, Anna Marie Light, born Anna Marie Hartley, my home and all its contents. I leave her my savings, $15,000, with the request that she use it to honor the memory of Dorothy Smith, whose life was stolen and whose family never received justice. Someone in the audience gasped softly. Harrison continued, I leave her my photographs, my letters, and my love, things I could only give from a distance. And I leave her the truth, which I should have given her long ago. He paused, then read the final section. To my son, Richard Hartley, who now calls himself Richard Light, I leave nothing but this. I forgive you. But forgiveness does not erase what you did. I hope someday you find the courage to face it. Harrison set down the will. The room was silent. Then he picked up the letter, the one Walter had written to me, and began to read. I failed my son, Harrison read, his voice thick with emotion. I raised him, loved him, and tried to teach him right from wrong. But when it mattered most, he ran. And I didn't stop him. I failed Dorothy Smith. I failed her family. I failed everyone who deserved the truth. But I will not fail you. I saw Evelyn wipe her eyes. I saw Sarah Watkins write faster. And I saw my mother turn and walk out of the room. My father stayed. I returned to the podium and opened the case file. This, I said, holding up the first page, is the police report from June 12, 1980. It documents the death of Dorothy Smith on Route 28. She was hit by a vehicle. Witnesses reported a dark-colored Honda Civic, late 1970s model. The driver fled the scene. Dorothy was pronounced dead at the scene. She was 19 years old. She had no family. The case went cold in 1985. I set the report on the table so Sarah could photograph it. This, I continued, holding up another document, is the vehicle registration for a 1978 Honda Civic, dark blue, registered to Richard Hartley at an address in Pittsburgh. The car was reported sold to a scrapyard in 1981. There are no records of it after that. I looked directly at my father. And this, I said, holding up a photocopy of a Social Security application, is the documentation for Richard Light, a name that didn't exist before 1981. My father's jaw tightened. I'm not here to accuse anyone, I said carefully. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not a judge. I'm just someone who believes that Dorothy Smith deserves to be remembered, that her death deserves to be acknowledged, and that the people responsible for burying the truth should be held accountable. I closed the folder. This case was never solved. But the statute of limitations for vehicular homicide in Pennsylvania hasn't expired. I'm asking the authorities to reopen this investigation, and I'm asking anyone who has information, anyone who remembers that night, to come forward. I paused. Because silence isn't protection, it's complicity. The room erupted in whispers. Sarah Watkins raised her hand. Ms. Light, does your father have any comment? I looked at him. He didn't move. Harrison stood. We have a witness who'd like to speak. Mrs. Evelyn Price has lived across the street from the Light family for 40 years. She was a neighbor of Walter Hartley's in 1980. Mrs. Price? Evelyn rose slowly, smoothing her cardigan, and stepped to the microphone. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. My name is Evelyn Price. I'm 78 years old, and I've been carrying a secret for 45 years. She looked out at the audience. On the night of June 12, 1980, I couldn't sleep. I was sitting by my bedroom window with a cup of tea. At 2 a.m, I saw a car pull into the Hartley driveway. It was a dark Honda Civic. The front bumper was dented. The headlight was cracked. A young man got out, Richard Hartley. He was 23 years old at the time. She glanced toward my father. His father, Walter, came outside. They argued. I couldn't hear what they said, but I could see Richard was upset, frantic. Walter was trying to calm him down. By the next morning, the car was gone. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the podium. Walter came to my house that afternoon. He asked me not to call the police. He said Richard would turn himself in. He said he'd make sure justice was done. I believed him. I trusted him. Her voice cracked. But Richard never turned himself in. He disappeared. And I didn't know what had happened until years later, when Walter moved next door to this family. That's when I understood. Walter was trying to protect his granddaughter, Anna. He sacrificed everything to keep her safe. She looked at me, her eyes wet. I should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry, Anna. I'm sorry, Dorothy. She stepped back. The room was utterly silent. The door at the back of the room slammed open. My father walked down the aisle, his face tight with controlled fury. My mother had returned, trailing behind him, her face streaked with tears. "This is slander," my father said loudly. "You have no proof, just accusations from a man who was obsessed with my family and a neighbor who misremembered something from 40 years ago." I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him. "Then dispute it," I said calmly. "If this is slander, sue me. If Evelyn is lying, present evidence. If the case file is fabricated, prove it." His hands clenched into fists. "I have your birth certificate," I continued. "I have the vehicle registration. I have the police report. I have a witness with documentation, dates, times, details she recorded the day after it happened. If I'm wrong, show me where." Sarah Watkins stood. "Mr. Light, would you like to make a statement?" He stared at her, then at me, then at the faces watching him from every corner of the room. His mouth opened, closed. Harrison stood, his voice measured and professional. "Mr. Light, this is a public forum. If you have evidence to dispute these claims, I encourage you to present it. Otherwise, I'd ask that you allow Ms. Light to finish." For a moment, I thought my father would shout, would lunge forward, would do something, anything to stop this. But he didn't. He just stood there, frozen, as if the weight of 45 years had finally caught up to him. Then he turned and walked out. My mother looked at me one last time, her face a mixture of grief and fury, and followed. The door closed behind them. Someone in the audience started clapping, then another, then the whole room. By that evening, the story was everywhere. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette published Sarah Watkins' article online at 6 o'clock. The headline read, "Local teacher exposes 45-year-old hit-and-run cover-up. Grandfather's deathbed will reveals family secret." The article was thorough, fair. It quoted me, Harrison, and Evelyn. It included scans of the police report and the vehicle registration. It referenced the case file and noted that the statute of limitations had not expired. By midnight, it had been shared over 2,000 times. Local news stations picked it up. Radio hosts discussed it on morning talk shows. People I hadn't spoken to in years texted me, asking if it was true, if I was okay, if there was anything they could do. Some messages were supportive. "You're so brave. I'm proud of you. Dorothy Smith deserves justice." Others were not. "How could you do this to your own father? You're destroying your family for attention. This is disgusting. You should be ashamed." I didn't respond to any of them. On Monday morning, I got a call from the Pittsburgh Police Department. "Ms. Light, this is Detective Marcus Hall. I'm calling regarding the case you presented over the weekend. We've reviewed the file, and we'd like to speak with you. We're reopening the investigation into Dorothy Smith's death." I sat down on my couch, my hands shaking. "Thank you," I whispered. "We'll need to interview you, Mrs. Price, and your father. We'll be in touch soon." When I hung up, I called Harrison. "They're reopening it," I said. He didn't sound surprised, just tired. "Good. That's good, Anna." I sat in the silence of my apartment and thought about Walter. I hoped, wherever he was, he knew. The investigation moved slowly. Detective Hall interviewed me first. He was in his 50s, patient and methodical, with a notebook he wrote in by hand. He asked me to walk him through everything: the funeral, the will, the letters, the case file. Did your grandfather ever tell you directly that your father was responsible? He asked. No, but he left documentation. Do you have any physical evidence? The car, clothing, anything from that night? No, just the records. He nodded and wrote something down. A week later, they interviewed Evelyn. She brought her journal from 1980, a small leather-bound book with her handwriting on every page. On June 13, 1980, she'd written, I saw R. Hartley return home late last night, 2 a.m. Car damaged. Front bumper, headlight. Argument with father in driveway. Car gone this morning. Something wrong. Detective Hall took photographs of the entry. Then they contacted my father. He refused to speak without a lawyer present. His lawyer, a man in an expensive suit from a downtown firm, released a statement. Mr. Light categorically denies any involvement in the incident described. He has no comment at this time and will not be participating in any further interviews. 3 weeks later, Detective Hall called me again. Ms. Light, I wanted to update you. We've reviewed all available evidence. Unfortunately, the vehicle in question was destroyed in 1981. There's no physical evidence, no DNA, no forensic material. The witness testimony is compelling, but without corroboration, it's not enough to bring charges. I closed my eyes. However, he continued, the case will remain open. If any new evidence surfaces, we'll pursue it. And I want you to know, what you did mattered. Dorothy Smith's name is back in the system. People know what happened to her. That counts for something. Thank you, I said quietly. But I knew it wasn't over. My father called me on a Thursday night in November. I almost didn't answer. But something in me, some last, stubborn thread of hope, made me pick up. Anna. His voice sounded different, hollow, tired. What do you want? I asked. There was a long silence. Then he said, I need to tell you something. I didn't respond. I was 23, he said quietly. I'd been drinking. I shouldn't have been driving, but I thought I was fine. It was late, the road was empty. And then, she was just there. I didn't see her until it was too late. My breath caught. I hit the brakes, but his voice cracked. She went over the hood. I heard the sound. I stopped the car and got out, and she was just lying there. I tried to wake her up. I checked for a pulse, but she was gone. I pressed the phone to my ear, my whole body shaking. I panicked, he continued. I got back in the car and I drove. I didn't call 911. I didn't stop. I just drove. And by the time I got home, I knew I'd ruined everything. You could have turned yourself in, I whispered. I know, I should have. My father begged me to, but I was terrified. I thought I'd lose everything. My future, my freedom, my life. So I ran. I changed my name. I buried it. And I told myself that if I just kept moving forward, it would disappear. It didn't, I said. No, it didn't. He exhaled shakily. Walter spent the rest of his life paying for what I did. And I let him. I wiped my eyes. I'm sorry, Anna. I'm so sorry. Tell that to Dorothy Smith's family, I said. Tell it to the police. Tell it to everyone. I can't. Then we have nothing else to say. I hung up. Harrison found Dorothy Smith's uncle in early December. His name was Gerald Smith. He was 78, a retired electrician living in a small town outside Cleveland. He'd been Dorothy's father's younger brother, the only family she'd had after her parents died in a house fire when she was 16. Harrison arranged for us to meet at a diner halfway between Pittsburgh and Cleveland. I brought the $15,000 Walter had left, plus $10,000 of my own savings. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Gerald was a small man with white hair and kind, tired eyes. He stood when I walked in and shook my hand gently. You must be Anna. Yes, sir. We sat in a booth by the window. I didn't know how to start. So I just told him the truth. I told him about Walter, about the will, about the press conference and the investigation, and I told him I was sorry. So sorry. That it had taken 45 years for anyone to say Dorothy's name out loud. Gerald listened quietly. When I finished, he nodded. I always wondered, he said. After she died, the police said it was a hit and run. They said they'd find who did it. But they never did. And after a while, I stopped asking. I thought maybe it didn't matter anymore. It matters, I said. He looked at me with wet eyes. Thank you for remembering her. I handed him the envelope with the money. This is from Walter Hartley, I said. And from me. I know it doesn't bring her back, but Walter wanted her family to know she wasn't forgotten. Gerald opened the envelope, looked at the check, and closed his eyes. She was a good kid, he whispered. She deserved better. She did. We drove to the cemetery together that afternoon. In February, the district attorney's office released a statement. After a thorough review of all available evidence, we have determined that there is insufficient physical evidence to pursue criminal charges in the 1980 death of Dorothy Smith. While witness testimony and circumstantial evidence suggest involvement by Richard Light, formerly Richard Hartley, the absence of forensic evidence and the destruction of the vehicle in question prevent us from meeting the burden of proof required for prosecution. The case will remain open. I read the statement 3 times. I wasn't surprised. Harrison had warned me. But it still felt like a door closing. My father wasn't going to prison. But he wasn't free either. Within 2 months, his financial consulting business collapsed. Clients left. Referrals stopped. The whispers followed him everywhere. At the grocery store, at the bank, at church. People knew. My mother moved out in March. She filed for separation and went to stay with her sister in Philadelphia. She didn't contact me. I didn't contact her. In April, my father sold the house. He moved to a small apartment on the other side of town, somewhere no one knew his name. He called me once more in May. Anna, he said quietly, I just wanted to say, I know you'll never forgive me, but I want you to know I'm sorry. For all of it. I didn't hang up. I just listened. I destroyed everything, he continued. My family, my life, Walter's life, Dorothy's life. I know that. And I have to live with it. Yes, I said softly. You do. There was a long pause. I hope someday you find peace, Dad, I said. But I can't be part of your life until you face what you did. Publicly. I can't. Then this is goodbye. I hung up. And I didn't call back. I live in Walter's house now. It took me a few months to move in fully, to paint the walls, to replace the old furniture, to make it mine. But it feels right, like coming home to a place I didn't know I'd been missing. I tore down the fence. It took 2 weekends and a rented chainsaw, but I pulled down every plank, every post, every piece of wood that had kept my grandfather and me apart for 28 years. In its place, I planted a hedge of roses, white ones, Dorothy's favorite, according to Gerald. The house itself is small, but it's full of light now. I painted the walls soft gray and hung photos on every surface. Pictures of Walter, pictures of me as a child, pictures of Dorothy that Gerald gave me. She's smiling in all of them, young and bright and full of a future she never got to live. I started a scholarship fund in Walter and Dorothy's names. It's small, just 2 awards a year, $1,500 each, for students who've lost parents and want to study education or social work. The first 2 recipients were announced last month. I cried when I read their essays. Evelyn comes over for tea every Sunday. She brings shortbread cookies and tells me stories about Walter. The quiet man who fixed her porch railing without being asked, who shoveled her driveway every winter, who never stopped being kind even when the world was cruel to him. He loved you so much, she told me once. He used to say you were the only good thing Richard ever did. I don't talk to my parents anymore. It hurts. But some wounds don't heal with silence. They heal with distance. And I'm learning to be okay with that. I sit on Walter's porch sometimes, my porch now, in the same rocking chair he sat in for 40 years. From here, I can see the house where I grew up. New people live there now, a young couple with a toddler. They wave when they see me. I wave back. The fence is gone, the gap is gone, the wall between us is gone. And I think about what Walter wrote in his letter. I could only love you from a distance. For 40 years, he watched me grow up through a hole in a fence. He left me gifts I didn't understand. He kept photographs he could never show me. He went to court, endured lawsuits, lived in isolation. Also, I could have a father. Even if that father didn't deserve me, he sacrificed everything, and he never asked for anything in return. I used to think love was supposed to be loud, grand, visible. But Walter taught me that the deepest love is often the quietest. It's the love that doesn't demand recognition, the love that protects without being seen, the love that holds on even when letting go would be easier. I think about my father sometimes. I wonder if he thinks about Dorothy, if he thinks about Walter, if he thinks about me. I hope he does. Not because I want him to suffer, but because I want him to understand what he lost. Not just his reputation, or his business, or his family, but the chance to be the kind of person who tells the truth. The kind of person who faces what he's done. The kind of person Walter was. I don't hate my father, but I don't forgive him either. Some things can't be forgiven until they're fully faced, and he's not there yet. Maybe he never will be, but I am. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it moved you, if it made you think about your own family, your own fences, your own silences, please leave a comment. Tell me, what truth have you been afraid to tell? I read every single one, and your stories matter. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. This channel is about more than just stories. It's about finding the courage to live honestly, even when it's hard. There are more stories like this one in the description below. Click on the next video, and let's keep going together. Remember, you don't owe anyone your silence, not even family, especially not family.